Parliament is back this week and there's plenty on the agenda, although I have to say not much of it seems positive for the country. Here to render his frank assessment of what's going on is LNP Senator for Queensland, Gerard Rennick, who does do great work in the Senate, Senator, so you're not included in the previous bashing of politicians. Welcome to Bernardi. Hey, before I get to some federal issues, it looks like the drums of political doom are beating for Queensland Premier Annastacia Palaszczuk, with her one team white anting their leader while she's on Italian holiday. Is she going to survive, Gerard, or do you think she needs to go?
Well, Cory, I can answer that second question very easily. Yes, she needs to go. I doubt that she will survive, only because I don't think she wants the job herself. Personally, I think she's checked out and she's left the building a long time ago. And it's the height of arrogance to do that in the best of times, but literally we're in the worst of times in Queensland with a health crisis and a crime crisis and a homeless crisis in Queensland. So for Anna Palaszczuk to jet off to Italy when all of these issues facing the good people of Queensland is just the height of arrogance.
Yeah, it does smack of someone who's checked out. Do you got any tips on who will be replacing her?
No, I don't, but I do think she will be replaced because, I just don't think she herself wants to be there.
Yeah, it's not going to change the outcome for Queensland, no matter who they put in charge. Hey, Labor federally is scheduled to introduce its industrial relations legislation this week. Based on what I've seen in the public domain, there seems plenty to worry about for small business. Here's what Peter Dutton had to say about this today.
Why is the government motivated to do this when every business group, every organisation is against it? It's because it's on the union wish list. We want to see the sovereign risk issues addressed that the government's created for the first time in many decades.
Gerard, I think Peter Dutton's on the money there. How do you consider the change the government wants to make here?
Well, I think it's alarming because from my understanding of the bill, and I haven't gone through the ins and outs of it, is that this bill will actually give unions the right to come in and inspect the books of businesses without any prior notice or their approval. Now, if that's true, they can have access to all the employee and employer data. And I just think, for a start, that's a gross breach of privacy. But, this will actually hurt small business the most. And, of course, this is Labor's modus operandi, where they love to attack small business and pick on the little guy. But can I just say, there is nothing more hypocritical than the Labor Party jumping up and down about so-called wage theft. And while I'll call it out when I see it, and where it does occur, that's a bad thing. But the true wage theft in this country has always been superannuation. There was never a referendum in 1992 where Paul Keating went to the Australian people and said, by 2025, are you happy for us to take 12% of your income and give it to someone you've never met in the ivory palaces of Sydney or Melbourne, and there's no guarantee you're going to get it back until you're 67. Now, if that to me is the true wage theft in this country, and that's what needs to be called out, and I'll look into it and I'll see if I can actually move an amendment this week that makes superannuation optional, because I don't want to listen to the Labor Party talk about wage theft while they're condoning and forcing superannuation to go up to 12%. And there's been rumours that they actually want to lift it to 15% beyond 2025.
Yeah, I accept your point there. I quite like super, but what irks me with it is how can anyone plan for the long term when governments of all stripes, but most notably Labor, clearly think it's their money and they keep changing the rules and to disadvantage people who have actually acted within the rules to save for their own retirement?
Well, the problem is, Cory, for people on low incomes, they just don't have a spare 12% left over after they've paid for the cost of living in their taxes to actually hand over and save until they're 67. And if you actually look at the figures today, and I'll grant that we haven't had a full generation of people come through superannuation for 40 years, we've still got 50% of retirees on a full pension. So that's exactly the same amount it was in 1992. So it's not even superannuation isn't even doing the job it was supposed to of getting people off the pension. Yet we have the Productivity Commission costed the cost of superannuation with a whole battalion of financial engineers managing other people's money at $30 billion a year. If you want to talk about productivity, that has to be, the lack of productivity in this country, the creation of that industry over the last 3 decades has had a massive drag on productivity.
Yeah, and no surprise who dominates it, the industry super funds, and they are a flow of cash through the Labor Party. No coincidence there. Hey, speaking of a company that I think is too close to the Labor Party, Qantas has been in the news lately, and I got to say none of it is good. It's got refund problems, phantom flight bookings, hoarding airport slots. This company is a shambles, and now their CEO gets a $10 million bonus. I got to say, Jared, it's hard to know why it was privatised because it's now so closely protected and propped up by the government. But I reckon that protection racket is costing us enormously with the irrational decision not to allow Qatar to have more flights, keeping airfares higher than they should be. We need an inquiry into what's going on here, I reckon. What do you think?
Yeah, look, Cory, you're right. I mean, I'm not a fan of privatisation of infrastructure, but I was never against the privatisation of Qantas and Telstra because they're retail, fast-moving retail industries, and they're not meant to be monopolies. And I think a good example of where Qantas has been protected was the blocking of letting Qatar Airlines come in and out of Australia. That certainly would have provided a little bit more competition to Qantas. Mind you, however, though, Alan Joyce has been absolutely milking this company dry for his own benefit. For him to get a $10 million bonus in light of the handouts that Qantas got throughout the COVID crisis, I just think is arrogance writ large. Now, what's interesting about this, you'd think Anthony Albanese, if he could read the mood of the Australian people, would be running a mile from hanging out with Alan Joyce, but he seems to be hanging out with him all the time. And it just goes to show, I think, how out of touch Anthony Albanese is the fact that he can't even see how arrogant and how out of touch Alan Joyce is. And we've seen this in the fact that Alan Joyce has given Anthony Albanese's son membership at the Qantas Lounge. That in itself just reeks of arrogance. The other thing that Qantas needs to be called out on is that they wouldn't refund that $500 million of cancelled bookings throughout COVID. Now, they've had to back down on that due to embarrassment. But yet again, this is a company that's out of touch. It's not interested in serving the people. It seems to be more interested in pushing its ideological agenda, not the least The Voice, and as well as that, Alan Joyce's own back pocket.